let's just take a minute and sort of, as we say, transition from getting here to being here. Take a deep breath and have a word of prayer. Holy One, we often say, and not without truth, that our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends of those who have experienced senseless violence in their lives and communities. We recognize, however, that this is not enough. Mobilize us, God. We do not want to be desensitized to violence. Stir something deep within that empowers us to end violence of all kinds and work diligently for a world where peace will reign. Give us open minds to learn and give us courage that we need to act. Show us how to use our hearts and our hands, our very beings, for your kingdom come on this earth. Through the presence of the Holy Spirit, provide us with the strength and creativity we need as we seek to protect all of your beloved creation. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. I'm going to introduce our panelists and then I'm just going to sit with them for a time of conversation. But many of you will know Cynthia and Stephen Lloyd. They are educators from Butler High School and longtime members of First Pres. They were married here, raised 2 daughters in the church, and have taught school for over 30 years, and have both been teaching in the history department at Butler High School for 20 years.
Wow.
And then we have Leiteshia Carter from Westerly Hills Academy, and she has over 25 years of experience in the human services and social work field, and 8 years of counseling experience as a clinical mental health therapist. She is a nationally board certified licensed clinical mental health counselor. That's a big title. I hope you have like just initials for that after your signature line, because that's a lot. You have a long-standing career in education with Charlotte Mecklenburg, and you work at, as I said, our beloved school, Westerly Hills. So we're just gonna sit down and have some conversation time now. So Cynthia and Stephen, I'm gonna start with y'all. Questions here. So thank y'all first for being willing to be here with us. I know it's a sensitive topic. Maybe particularly for Cynthia and Stephen, next Sunday is the 5-year anniversary of a really tragic incident at Butler High School. So why don't you, many of us will remember reading about that in the news and walking alongside the community on that journey, but there are probably some here in the room who don't know what I'm speaking of. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that incident and how it affected the community that you serve with and alongside and for, and then how it still continues to work on that community today.
Okay. So a student, it was the beginning of school, and a student,
Monday morning.
a student came in and brought a gun, and the young man was a freshman and had some conflict in the neighborhood and brought a gun to school. And right before the 7:15 school bell began our school day, got to a fight, a conflict, and shot another sophomore at Butler in the hallway. So, and that was the beginning of Butler's experience through this. We as adults and we as students process that very differently. The day of, it was pretty obvious that this was a conflict between 2 kids that we went into lockdown, and that was the procedure. And but it was frightening for everyone, and certainly everyone processed it very differently. And I feel like as we have spent some time reflecting, we have realized that our community is made up of the students and teachers, staff, community members, but also parents. And so as parents and teachers, I think we processed it very differently, but it has profoundly affected not just the Butler community, but I think CMS as well. So I don't know.
want to interrupt, but the people on Zoom really can't hear us if we don't use the
Oh,
mic.
sorry. I thought I
This
was
seems
using-
more intimate, but the Zoom folks at home can't hear us.
Gotcha.
At Butler, it, still impacts our community today. I mean, the feelings are still very raw. And this week, I'm sure, with the 5th year, I don't want to call it anniversary, but memorial, coming up, it is something that we process on a daily basis, at Butler. Because it doesn't really, our incident didn't really fit into the national narrative of the mass shooting scenarios that are so common, and there have been so many since what happened at our school. We feel like in the larger conversation, what happened at our school just kind of gets pushed aside when we have done training that we are required to do every year for active shooter training, and the trainers don't even mention our incident, even though that our entire staff is in the room, because so much of the focus is on the random mass shooter situations that it kind of gets diminished, I guess, in the larger conversation, but to us it is still a very, very real daily emotional struggle for a lot of people. And like Cynthia said, it's been amazing how different people's reactions have been. I would equate it to like grieving the loss of a loved one. Everyone grieves different. And that's kind of the way it has been, with our colleagues and our students. Most of the students who were there that day kind of filtered through the school. Really only people that remember the actual event, staff.
Maybe I've heard this one.
We've seen some we've seen some effect of this event in terms of CMS's response, school response. We've seen a lot of immediately after the student response. I have to say, in some sense, was positive. There was a lot of call for change. There were student organizations that popped up, SAVE being one of them, Students Against Violence Everywhere, students demand action, moms demand action. I think one of the things that our community has struggled with is sustaining that call for change, and how can this not be something that another school community goes through. And we've seen that that's a struggle throughout the country as well too. So we have seen as teachers a bigger push, not just with this, but with COVID, for mental health, which I know that you can speak to even better. But as teachers, we're asked to do a lot of social emotional teaching, which certainly is important, as well as sort of technical training. Unfortunately, the gun violence in our schools, in our churches, in our communities, and probably at your places of work have required that we go through training. Just after Butler's shooting, there was the UNCC shooting. I know that, I mentioned the fact that I feel like we processed and dealt with this as teachers. And so we have been trained to take care of the kids in our school. And so Stephen and I thought about how, some of our colleagues, that was hard. It wasn't hard for us to do that, because that's what we've been trained to do. However, I think as a parent, if this event had happened at my kids' school, I would have processed that very differently. And I know that there are families that have kids at Chapel Hill. I know there are families that have kids at Ardrey Hill, and even though that was a hoax, that's the same emotional process that people have gone through, even with real shootings. So
Yeah,
when you all were kind enough to come and meet with me in my office, you kind of talked about sort of the really PTSD response when something happens at another school, or even things, Steve, I think you said with me, drops a book and it makes a loud noise, you know, on the top floor. And a little bit about what those little, I don't wanna call them little even, but that compound trauma, and how folks have dealt with that differently, in your community.
Yeah, like I said, it is a daily grind, and it's harder for us on the others. You know, I think from our perspective, and thankfully we have had each other to support each other and reflect, and we do a lot more closer to the event, but it still comes up in conversation how some teachers just couldn't handle the constant reminders walking past the site in the school building, you know, the fire drills, the lockdown drills, and every time there's an announcement over the loudspeaker, it brings back these micro traumas that really impact people so much that, I mean, we've lost some teachers at Butler because couldn't handle the constant reminders. And others, you know, we go into teacher mode and we're there to support the kids and what they need, their emotional support becomes more important than, you know, sometimes our own sanity or security. But there's so many constant reminders that it's, and then we hear things, you know, from the broader community, like the Chapel Hill thing. It just brings back all of these memories of what our experience was.
I believe that when we're talking about trauma, we have to make sure that we have an understanding of it. And each one of us, our natural responses, fight, flight, or freeze. And that is what happens when we have incidents like Butler or Chapel Hill or UNCC, when we see professionals who can no longer do or provide their role because how their body is responding to an incident that took place on their campus. And so we, you know, when you're talking about the teachers that left, those teachers left because they were in that moment where they couldn't provide anything else, and their natural response was to freeze. And so we have to just make sure when these incidences take place, we have to check in with everybody in that building and on that campus, because we all have a response to it. And just like the students, you have, you know, adults who don't know how to process what just happened. One of the bigger issues I think that we don't get an opportunity to address is these are things that are happening in the communities, and the end result happen at school. That's where they come to head and come to light. But they often start in places that don't have anything to do with the school building.
Just hold on to that mic because you beat me to the punch. So I was gonna ask you to expound a little bit on trauma and compound trauma and the effects that it has. Our fourth panelist, who I hope is all right, works with sort of youth aged kind of 18 to 24. And we know that is, you know, obviously the largest demographic that is affected by gun violence. However, the trauma of gun violence, I think, is felt across the age spectrum. And Leiteshia, you work at an elementary school. So talk to us a little bit, if you want to expand on trauma in general and how it affects communities and individuals, but also how you see it play out with the littles. because I think that's important.
Trauma from the elementary spectrum is really different. What we see is a lot of behaviors. And it's a range of behaviors, misbehavior because something happened to the student. And so where our normal response, again, might be fight, flight, or freeze. Well, my elementary baby, it could be, I need to go to sleep. I need to get up under the teacher and kind of feel protected. But they're getting in trouble to get that attention. So we see a lot of responses for the student where the student is getting in trouble. But it's related to a trauma experience that they've had. What we see a lot of today is that it mimics behaviors of ADHD. Those responses are very similar. And so we have to pay attention to make sure a student is not misdiagnosed with ADHD, but they truly could be a trauma response. So having a healthy understanding of what behaviors look like is very key so that we are over-identifying students and misdiagnosing students with ADHD based on some of the things that are happening within their households.
Thank you for that. We talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences, and I know some of you have heard about the adverse childhood experience scale. And if you have more than 3, I think you're much more likely to suffer all sorts of ills as an adult. Do you think secondhand trauma, for lack of a better word, I don't really think there's such a thing as secondhand trauma, let me just be clear about that, would qualify as an adverse childhood experience?
I believe it's possible. Just from the perspective of mental health today, what we look at and how how students or adults are impacted by the things that happen to them, as a witness to it, it could have an impact and a lasting impact. And so I do think if we look at ACEs from just the standpoint of it having a long-term impact, like the study intended, I do think trauma can happen. That secondary trauma is relevant because everybody processes things differently. And so I do think it can, have a long-term effect. Absolutely.
Thank you. And Stephen and Cynthia, you might want to speak to this. We talked about it a little bit the other day. So I was talking to a good friend whose daughter was at Chapel Hill, and she called her, of course, and she was safe in her apartment and wasn't anywhere near what was going on. But her comment to her mom was, it was just a matter of time. And that was one of the saddest responses I heard. I heard kids who were scared. I heard kids who, were safe, but were worried about friends or, that kind of thing. But for a freshman girl who'd been at school for 2 weeks to be talking to her mom and say it was just a matter of time, really kind of broke my heart. And when we were talking, one of the things you said was that the kids have kind of gotten desensitized to it. And so we have this weird dichotomy, and not in a good way, of young people being perhaps forever impacted by trauma and gun violence in their community, but also becoming desensitized to gun violence, so they may not even be aware. So what are the challenges, for lack of a better word, to serving either littles or teenagers who are both affected by violence and desensitized to it?
Well, we have a unique perspective on that from Butler, because I think it's very easy as humans, but especially as children, think, oh, that's not gonna happen here.
Mhm.
And they go on with life as if nothing's wrong and nothing's gonna happen. And if it does, oh, well, it's just a matter of time. But the fact that we can constantly remind students, it happened here and we need to be ready for it. It kind of gives us leverage. We're doing this because it can happen here, it has happened here. And so when we go through trainings and we're emphasizing policies and procedures and those kinds of things, it has a lot more meaning because it actually happened at Butler. So from that perspective, I would, and we had this conversation, I feel safe at Butler because we're so sensitized to it, not desensitized. But it makes me worry for other places that still have that attitude, oh, it won't ever happen here. And that's just kind of a human response to try to block it out, pretend it's not really happening, and we can't do that anymore. And nobody should be able to do that anywhere, but it's kind of that flight and avoidance reaction.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you think that people are desensitized to the fact that lightning won't strike twice? And so, you've got everything in place now and you're prepared, but do you think there's also the feeling that it's already happened? We dodged future bullets because of what I did, sorry.
Yeah.
But, do you see people having that response as well? Like, it can't happen here again.
I don't think it's that it can't happen here again. I think that we are just a culture of violence. That it happens so often that you move on with your daily life and you go on until something happens again. And then we are asking the questions of how do we stop this? What do we need to do? How do we bring in support? But I honestly believe that we just keep moving. It is almost as it is expected, except nobody will say it's expected. I really do believe that. I think it happens so often that we have just gotten used to it, and that's the shameful part. That is the shameful part.
I happen to think, maybe I'm wrong, drug trafficking in schools from little kids on up, brings on gun violence too.
Certainly there are lots of different reasons why a child would feel that bringing a gun to school is the way to solve a conflict. It could be drugs, it could be bullying, it could be an unsafe home situation. One of the things that we talked about also is, which was interesting as we thought about Butler specifically, is Butler's in a suburb of Matthews. Butler remarkably reflects the greater Charlotte community in terms of their demographics, which a lot of people may not be aware of, but we are a third white, a third Black, a third Hispanic, 10% Asian, which is close to what Charlotte is. The reality is it can happen anywhere, and maybe that's the child's response of desensitization. I mean, the fact that maybe the student was aware that, this can happen anywhere. Unfortunately, we're at a point where we have to prepare for that. And so I don't know if it's being desensitized or maybe prepared and aware of how we're gonna move through our workplace, our school. And it's heartbreaking that that's what we have to do, but it is a way to cope, adapt, and live. So I don't know.
think one of the positive outcomes at Butler, and we're starting to hear a lot more of this, is how, you know, the next steps, you know, what do we do to prevent the next one of these events? And so much of our training and so much of the emphasis is on noticing warning signs. And the fact that just about every single mass shooting could have been prevented. And we've become participants in it's a nationwide program called See Something, Say Something, and it's really trying to encourage students to alert adults to what's going on, because they see and hear things that by the time we see and hear it, it's too late. And you know, there is this culture of, you know, snitches get stitches mentality amongst the students, and we're trying to counteract that. And so much of these programs and our education, our emotional support to the students is, it's okay to save people's lives. And that is what it's gonna take. It's a community effort that we preach every day in our classes. And the fact that we've been through that makes it a little more real for our students, but it needs to be more real for everyone, of course.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, when you're a young person, I mean, I remember it was not yesterday, but it's so important to be liked and to be popular and to be a good friend, and sort of, you know, see something, say something goes against that for, you know, it could be impacted by the desire to be liked and trusted and, you know, part of the crowd. And so what do we do as educators and adults to encourage our young people to come forward when they see something?
We have to make sure they understand that they are helping others. That to see something, say something could save a life. And so make sure that they understand that they aren't getting somebody in trouble, but they are helping. They can't be bystanders. They can't stand around and allow things to just take place and be as they are. We have to step in and step up.
What, talk a little bit about, you know, the trusted adult sort of culture, or I don't know if it's a policy particularly, but something that schools try to cultivate so that young people feel like they've got someone they can go to.
Each year in CMS, students take a survey, parents do too, the Panorama survey, and one of the questions is, are there adults in your building, or who would you consider your trusted adult, whether it's a coach, a teacher, a counselor, the principal, whatever. And so we get that data back, and one of the things that most of the schools are trying to do is cultivate those relationships for students with adults that they already feel, for whatever reason, that they would consider that individual a trusted adult. And it could be for academic reasons, but one of the things that our big push has been is to have relationships, a relational, a school with good relationships between people, peers, as well as adults and students, seems to be one that's healthy, one that's safe. And so that has become one of the things that we have looked at as a district, not just at Butler, but at all the schools, and find very important. I think wonderful way to cultivate an avenue for kids to come and speak to adults about whatever's going on in their community or in the school.
Leiteshia, do you want to speak to that?
You hit it, you nailed that one, because we do, in the classroom, in school buildings, relationships are so key. I tell people, and teachers specifically all the time, that they have all the power. Once you develop a relationship with a student, you can get them to do just about anything. And so I ask most teachers to tap into that power because they don't realize they have that superpower. Most children just want structure and they want to know that somebody cares about them. And if you can tap into those two things, you can develop a relationship with the student. And I tell them all the time to tap into those things, and you will see students responding differently.
Some of us have been collectively reading a book. How many of you have read or are reading Common Ground? For those of you who don't know, that's our Plowshares book read for this month, and we're having a discussion on Thursday night, right, Sue? I'm looking at you to make sure I get that right. That information is on the website, or Sue or I would be happy to talk to you about it afterwards if you aren't aware. But one of the things we learned from reading this book is that we tend to fear the big event, right? The mass shooter. Obviously, as a church, they say we are the most vulnerable on Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock. There's a lot of people in one place, all the doors are open. And so that's the incident that people are fear most emotionally. But that most of gun violence is either one-on-one or oneself. And so I would think that in terms of the trusted adult policy, that is where you can really, have an impact, is on those one-on-one or self-inflicted acts of violence. But, and I'm putting myself out on a limb here, but I think I'm going to. North Carolina has now said to teachers that if you learn something about your young person, if they want to change their pronoun, for example, or reveal some pretty personal stuff to a trusted adult at school, that they're required to tell the parents. And so what impact do you think that might have on our young people being vulnerable with a trusted adult? I'm sorry. I opened it now.
I think what we have to do is have appropriate conversations. So help the student who comes to you have an appropriate conversation with their parent. It can be difficult, especially if the student is afraid to tell their parent. But I think how we go in that process is making sure that we let the student know, if you tell me this, and this is what you're asking adults to call you, we have to communicate that with the parent. And then give this, how do we do that? Allow the student to have a voice in how we deliver that message. And I think that will help the student feel safe with us, because they came to us to help them process. And then it will help us have a conversation that they can't have with the parent. I think that's where we start. And I know that we see it some in elementary, not as much, because there's just a lot of gaining an understanding of who you are. And so those conversations aren't as hard to have as when you get into middle and high school, when there's so much expectation put on you as a child.
Yeah, there's so many mixed messages and contradictions, on one hand, especially since our event at Butler, but also since COVID. And the emotional impact that had on our students and society as a whole. But everything since then has been pushing us towards this relationship building, proactive approach to dealing with students and their emotional problems. And at the same time, we're being told by a segment of society that teachers aren't to be trusted, and that it puts up a lot of barriers to building those relationships when we are being asked to betray that trust by reporting things to parents. And I understand that there is this expectation of transparency in education, but when we're dealing with it, deepest emotions of students. You know, the confidentiality of students is pretty crucial in that process. Obviously, there are things that we're mandatory reporters of that, you know, cross that line, of course, but you know, just daily interactions with students, we're constantly now having to question, oh my gosh, is that something I have to tell parents? It really puts us in a difficult situation. Not that it wasn't difficult to begin with.
Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be a little more positive. This particular, House bill was, it allowed me to have conversations with students. So those of you that don't know, if Stephen wanted to be called Steve and not Stephen, I would have to say, you know, your name is Stephen in Power School, and so I'm gonna have to notify your parents that you want to be called Stephen, which is a notification, not a, can I have your permission, parents, to call him Steve, but this is what I have to do. And so there is a built-in conversation with the students. Now, it's usually not as simple as Steve and Stephen, but I have found a couple of students who I've been able to have pretty deep conversations. I'm still using the Power School pronoun that is there because they requested that I not notify parents. And so by not notifying them, I'm still calling them he, him, even though they want to be they, them. But that's a good conversation that I was able to have with a student. And I feel like built a relationship, even though my hands are tied in some certain ways, but I feel like at least in my small little instances, was able to make some interactions that I feel like were positive too. So trying to be positive.
So glad for
Power
that.
School is. they don't know Power
Oh,
School.
Power School is the database where your grades and all your information is found, and teachers and staff.
I wanna save the last 10 minutes or so for questions, but I wanna close with one for y'all. I think all of us would agree, we probably have some in the room as well, but being an educator right now seems so hard. On a lot of levels. I just think working in schools, while gun violence, we see instances at malls and clubs and, you know, at gas stations, but schools make the news. And I think, you know, dealing with that every day when you get up and drive to work is a thing. I think trying to love and care for students who are affected by gun violence in their lives is a thing. And how do you continue day after day in the good work that you do and stay grounded and committed to that work?
It helps that we have each other. That's a unique situation, and I think a lot of our colleagues struggle with the fact that they go home and don't really have someone to talk to that really knows what they're talking about and actually get what we deal with every day. And so, you know, the fact that we need to have trusted adults too, and someone to talk to, you know, that sort of emotional support and you know, churches, of course, and the faith community, the counseling community, so many, everybody in every walk of life probably needs counseling on some level. It's such a complex problem that we're dealing with. And it's having that emotional support of each other helps us a lot, for sure.
I think, children are our future. And at the end of the day, we need to help them so they can become adults. We've all made a decision in careers that we wanted to go into. And if you are in education, then you have a love of teaching and learning, modeling, so that the young people can be better and you can help them get to what their future is.
Yeah, thank you. You have anything to add?
Just that, not only colleagues, but friends in church and a good foundation in our relationships with, our personal faith relationship, our significant others, our colleagues, help us to focus on what you said, and that is to focus on our purpose as educators and the kids.
Thank you. It's certainly a calling. People say ministry is a calling. I think education is a calling. Let's take some questions from the audience. We got, 10 minutes or so. Brian?
My question, and I'm not sure I'm wording it with the most articulate, but I was contemplating while you guys were kind enough to share on the panel about how much different things are now than they were when, say, my dad was in high school and had a gun rack in the back of his, even when I was in high school, that was common. There was a gun rack in the back of your truck, and you never heard about schools getting shot up. What's different culturally? Is it this rugged individualism, don't tread on me type of ideology that you feel like fuels this culturally, that I can do what I want because this is America? Or, I mean, where has this breakdown occurred that, and I don't mean to sound like a gun enthusiast by any stretch of imagination, because I was never one with a gun rack, but it was not uncommon in the place where I grew up. So I'm just very curious.
I think personally, today we handle conflict different. I think it's somewhere it changed, where there was a time where if you had a conflict, you could sit down and talk with someone. And I think you said it appropriately. Today, it is about me. And because it is about me, everything revolves around me. And so if I feel threatened, violence is the answer. And I think we shifted somewhere. And today we just don't see conflict resolution skills being utilized. We see more direct violence. I don't know where it shifted, but it did. I remember in high school too, some of the guys having the gun racks in their truck. Never did we see them use them. Never did we see them turn to them, but that is the first go-to today.
I'm curious, do they teach any kind of conflict resolution in schools?
As a counselor, I do with my 5th grade groups. When I'm running groups, we do conflict resolution skills because we want them to be able to resolve things. And we do it from a trauma perspective. So we use kind of trauma-focused circles and conflict resolution as a way for them to handle conflicts that they have, student conflicts among each other.
I know a lot of the schools, middle schools especially, use peer mediation programs. And those kind of fizzle out in high schools, but I'm not sure why. But we both worked for several years in middle schools that had peer mediation program, and that's been going on for 20, 30 years. But it's an ongoing process. It's something the students have to buy into.
Wonderful. What other questions from the crowd? Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on the see something, say something discussion, and I'm just curious, I genuinely don't know the answer. But are students taught in see something, say something primarily to identify the signs of someone who is at risk of becoming violent, or are they looking for someone who's isolated and who is socially disconnected and not receiving support? Because, and I don't know the specifics of the situation here, but in the mass shootings that I've dealt with, the students are not in the in crowd. And it's not a question of the peer pressure is you're betraying someone in the in crowd. The issue of the peer pressure is maybe you don't want to associate yourself with someone who is isolated and who doesn't have the support. and is not receiving the rescue they need before they turn to violence. So my question is see something, say something primarily, this person is dangerous, or is it this person is alone?
Well, there are a lot of different warning signs that we're trained to look for. Isolation is certainly one of them, but we're looking for, and the students are told to look for concrete, indications, drawings that an isolated student might be making in a journal or, social media posts, anything that might indicate that they're in imminent danger. It's not just, a way of targeting students, saying that kid's dangerous. There have to be concrete, indications.
There's also a part of that training that is focused on, I think indirectly, the people that you're talking about in terms of the students being encouraged to watch out for others being bullied or others being targeted for whatever reason or differences or whatever. The students in the see something, say something training are asked to, what are some different things that you could do to reach out to students who don't have a friend, or you see them sitting crying in the corner, or, they give a lot of examples, which I think maybe more towards you, but my answer would be predominantly to the at-risk behaviors that other students see in students. But there is a good part of that training that's about identifying what is bullying, what do we do when you are being bullied, or if you see others that are taking part in something that, could be isolating, well, certainly is emotionally harming, but could be isolating and could then be the cause of someone's actions that they take because they're not in the in crowd or part of the group or something like that.
I think there was a hand back here.
I just wanted to make one more point. A lot of y'all know my daughter, who taught for about 8 or 9 years in Title I school, elementary school. I think the trauma from this, like in elementary school, you're less likely to have a child actually bring a gun, I think, than in high school. But there was an incident of a gun. It turned out to be a domestic violence situation in the parking lot in the carpool. But of course, the school was under lockdown, and so she had her, 20 little fourth graders, closed up in the room for hours. So they finally did, and the gun was discharged and it shot into a local home. No one was injured. But that kind of cumulative trauma has to be where on our littles. They're less likely to see this high school situation. And that, I think, is just so troublesome because then it does become very everyday when they have this. That's just a comment. It's not really a question, but I'm sure we would agree. That the little kids that happen to see that, of course, she worked really hard to keep the kids calm, and the police were there, and everything was going to be okay. I didn't know. I was panicking because I knew the school was under lockdown, and she had all these little kids. So that's just a comment.
Yeah, Barbara.
Brian's comment made me think about this, that what we've been talking about today is the reality of the culture that we live in now, and that we're just accepting it. And so what do we do about it? Which is certainly vital. But the small college where I teach, about a fourth of my students are international, and they cannot believe that we live with them. Because in their countries, when this kind of thing happened, I don't want to be political today, but
Yeah.
it is, it's weird to me to think about that.
Yeah.
We just have to deal with it.
I have international friends who pray for America, and we think of, yeah, absolutely, right?
I travel internationally all the time, and not once have I ever felt unsafe anywhere else. I just came back from Portugal 20 days ago. Like I don't feel unsafe going anywhere else. I feel unsafe at home.
Yeah, and it's sad. Wait, we had a hand back here a couple times. Let me get that one first. Hey, go ahead.
I was just wondering what the impact is, especially after COVID, of students arriving at Butler woefully unprepared at high school level.
Academically, is that what you're academically unprepared? I think I don't know, you can agree or disagree. I think we see less of the academic unpreparedness that elementary schools see. I think, in high school, so many of these courses are, content-based, so they may have lost an entire year of biology, and they may just be lacking in that, but in terms of reading and writing skills, we see that less, I think, than it's evident in elementary schools, so.
It's easier for us to catch up than I think on the elementary level, because they have some basic skills that we can, tap into.
But I will say that, some of the, things that have gone on in the CMS have been a result of, COVID. When we came back from COVID, we saw a lot more guns in schools. Minus the clear backpack debacle, but, we went through we have scanners now that we go through, that are like DSA scanners. That was not just Butler, that was every school. I think I'm correct in saying all high schools now have that, as well as middle schools. And so, that was, COVID had us at home. And at home, there were guns, and kids had them in their possession and brought them to school, and, conflicts waiting to happen. So, I feel like we're lucky in that sense.
Yeah, and we know that lots and lots were purchased during COVID, because you couldn't get them. Leona?
Well, I don't know whether it was bullying or divorce or what, but I had a neighbor whose son was so disturbed. I don't want to turn the gun laws later, but he ended up drawing pictures of swords and things like that. It's very disturbing. I think his mother probably got him help and everything. He's probably okay now. But she moved away, so I didn't know.
Yeah, that's certainly a warning sign. Yeah, Leona?
So we have a number of young people here with us today. So what would you say to them about, so that they feel safe going to schools and able to go and learn? I'm getting emotional as a parent, right? Because I have kids that go to school every day, and I want them to feel comfortable and safe.
I mean, I would say that we need to encourage them to take ownership of the situation, and they have to be advocates for themselves. And if they see something they don't think is safe, they need to have a trusted adult. And that was a huge thing we did with our daughters, was to, you need to identify somebody in that school you can go to. And your response shouldn't be to call us because we're 20 miles away. We can't do it. You've got to have somebody there in a crisis situation. And those are, the tools we can give them for coping.
And students know that your teachers have, what we want is for you to be safe. I mean, our mandate as a school is to provide a safe and orderly learning environment. The safe and orderly comes first, and then the learning environment, which you can't learn. Our job is to teach you, and we absolutely do everything. Please know that your teachers have been through so many trainings, so many thought processes. We've met as teams and colleagues. This is unfortunately our top priority. And then we really want you to pass that AP exam or be your EFGs, but please know that this is unfortunately where we are, and we are trained and we're ready.
And I believe just for students, make sure you are aware. Make sure you have a healthy understanding and be aware of your surroundings. I worked in a school building a long time. I remember the day that 9/11 happened because I was in the school in the front office. I don't feel unsafe on my campus. I don't. But I am very aware. So I think we have to teach our children to be aware today. We can't be ignorant to awareness because it can happen anywhere. And I think that starts with all of us doing a better job of understanding where we are and where we are in society today.
That's wonderful. Guys, we're gonna have to wrap up. I know that we could talk about this for a long time. I would be willing to guess that our panelists would linger for a few minutes and have some conversation with y'all individually. I have to get to worship. I guess I have to get to worship as well. I wanna let you know, that this is the second in a three-part series. So next week, Anna, during the Sunday school hour, will be addressing a little bit to Leona's beautiful emotion. There's a lament in this for people of faith. This is not, I'm gonna get emotional talking about it. This is not the created order that God intended for God's children to live in. And so that is a sad thing for us to wrestle with. And we have emotions about that, and we can get lost in that. And as resurrection people, we have to cling to hope and the fact that it can be different. And that is sort of what next week is about. Anna will lead us during the Sunday school hour through a time of lament. And then following worship, there will be a complimentary lunch, and we will have a panel of experts that will help us with what we can do. We will have Tracy Campbell from Mecklenburg County's Office of Violence Prevention. We'll have Dr. David Jacobs, who is from Atrium's Health's Office of Violence Prevention. And we will have Dr. Rodney Sadler from the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. Ryan was doing this because he knows Rodney will bring it about the Bible versus the Second Amendment. And we'll have Moms Demand Action, we'll have March 4th, we'll have Neighbors for Change. All kinds of people will be here with information and signups and lots of ways in a practical way that we can be involved. Well, we appreciate you and we appreciate all of you for being here today.